thing is,
I got it.
you
Sorry,
got
sorry
it.
for
Awesome.
that. I was
No
about to
problem.
say you were born ready, but it seems that I wasn't. My
You were
friend,
born ready, but soon wasn't, I would say.
because I lost my hockey team. It's all about that. My friend, it's a huge honor. It's the
Exactly.
first time, and they say the first time it's always the best. I must admit, huge fans, love that project. Everything I love about music, you find it in your band. But for people that don't recognize your beautiful face, beautiful hair, beautiful eyes, who the hell are you?
I am Olaf from Amaranth. We are a Swedish band based in Gothenburg. We are just about to release our seventh album called The Catalyst. So that's the short one.
It's such a crazy project because there's so much influences, and I think each individual brings something different with their personality and their music background. But I'm curious about you. Let's get back when you were a kid. How did you start discovering music? Is there any people around you, parents, friends, that influence you into the journey of discovering the world of music?
I guess it's the classical because obviously my parents, they were like huge music nerds, so they were listening to a lot of LPs with different kinds of music. So on my dad's side, you have more of the like the rock style, like he was listening to Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath back in the 80s when I was growing up. So and on my mother's side, it was like more classical music and also a bit of pop music. And then you have my sister, when you have a slightly older sibling, she was like into kind of both things. So I guess it was, she was maybe the first one that played some Metallica to me back in the day. So that really caught my attention at the same time as I was listening to. I don't know if you guys know like a Swedish group called Roxette. They did "It Must Have Been Love," back in the 80s. Great movie with Julia Roberts, and so it was a very, to say the least, an eclectic mix. On top of that, I had my grandfather who wanted to teach me, musical theory on the piano. So I guess that's kind of, besides the fact that the band members in Amaranth has very eclectic musical tastes. I think I also personally, each individual in Amaranth, not the least myself, who writes a lot of this music, has very eclectic taste in music. So I guess Amaranth is just a combination of all these different things because each little seed grew into like a little plant, if you will. And I guess Amaranth is a bouquet of all those things.
It's great. That's what I thought because, like I said, like there's so much energy injected in that project, and it's really powerful because first of all, there's three people singing, but with the music and everybody in the band, it brings something that you just want to cheer and dance, and it's really unique and original way to do metal. And was it something that you plan or it really came naturally, first of all, to get to three singers, but to inject that kind of originality into the project?
I guess it's a little bit of both, and maybe in this case, as in the order that you mentioned it, a little bit of all three things. Because first of all, when we started to talk about doing music together, like the individual band members, because I was talking to like all the singers separately. Plus, I was touring together with Morten, the drummer in a death metal band, and we were all having these different ideas, like what could our next project be? Because we were all like we had all been in the music scene for maybe 7 to 8 to 9 years professionally, so to speak. And we all figured that if you've been into the music scene for 8 years, you're professionals, and now you've learned from all your mistakes, right? And the thing is that to a certain extent we did. So we were not starting, super fresh. We were not starting at 17-year-olds as I did in my previous band. So we had all these ideas, and basically the fundamental idea was let's do really powerful music, exactly as you say. And that sounds like a very vague term, but it was intentionally vague. Like let's get influences from all kinds of genres, all kinds of perspectives on metal that just are extra powerful. So let's take it from powerful pop, maybe even some powerful classical music chords, maybe even some powerful, I don't know, maybe even some hip hop beats. If it's powerful enough, then it works for us, basically. And then you have these three different singers that came about also kind of coincidentally. since all of us were friends to begin with, and we had all these different singers trying out on the songs. And when we heard the first song that featured all three singers kind of switching back and forth, that's kind of when we knew that we had struck gold in that department. So far from being like a gimmick, like look at us, we have three singers. Linkin Park had two, but we have three, so we're 33% better. It was more like this really brings something to the table. This makes it more interesting, creates more dynamics, more contrast. We also very early figured that we want to do short and to the point, and very catchy songs. So like even the very first song that we wrote had this like really big chorus that everybody could sing along with after hearing it two times. So we were very enthusiastic about these different aspects of how we could bring these components together. And I think already from the first or the second song all the way up till the release of the Catalyst, the goal has been kind of clear, like powerful music that is entertaining but still very well thought out. We really care about the music, good musicianship. I can, because since I'm not one of the singers, I can with a good conscience say that we have three of the best singers in the entire metal scene. So all of these things combined, that's what makes up Amaranth, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's really three powerful vocal of different things, but connect together. It brings just one voice, and it's really strong. And it's so cool because I'm a huge Remote fan. Straight to the point, like just getting people attentions and make them dance and having fun. And I think it's the same, and getting like because normally we're expecting like 6, 8, 10 minute songs. When we see like 3, 4 minutes, like, oh, they're straight to the point, but you want more because I listen to the records and after that I press again play. And there's few bands that I can listen songs over and over again, but I think that some are so exciting that it brings joys and a lot of great emotions. And we felt that you're a live band through the catalog. Like, okay, those guys are having fun in the studio. It's so fun to listen, but live it's gonna be duplicate because there's the crowd too, and I'm sure it's a huge family affair. So all the family together, it's who having more fun, the crowd or the band.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of what's on display there, because honestly, like this is also our job. And you could ask yourself like the question, like, can you always have fun at work? And that's kind of, when we were creating this style of music for ourselves, it was even almost like a philosophical question. Like, if we do this really uplifting music, can we always be uplifting when we go on stage, or what's the mood at play here? And I think the resounding answer to that 15 years down the line is a resounding yes. Because I mean, even if we sometimes on tour you miss your family, you're far away from home, time zones don't match up, you're jet lagged, whatever. But once you go on stage and you have a great crowd, like, I mean, that's something that any band should be appreciative of, that you have a crowd at all. And especially lately, but throughout our entire career, we've been fortunate and blessed to have relatively big crowds. So if you're not energized by that, you're not energized by anything. So I can very honestly say that 99.99 times out of the times, the occasions that we have walked on stage, it's just only been phenomenal, with the exception being technical difficulties or whatever. So I think that it's such an uplifting experience to be on stage, especially when you're backed by such energetic music, that it's kind of it's relatively easy to project that feeling onto the audience. So that's from the live perspective, combined with what I was talking about before, in the studio. This is exactly what Amaranth is about. Like, it's lifting people's spirits, but it's not supposed to be shallow. It's to us, it's very authentic. It's very close to the music that we do listen to. In my case, if I played some really complicated prog with some really sad vocal lines and depressive lyrics, this wouldn't be authentic for me, because that's not who I am.
It's such a great point. You're right. You're 100% right. And yeah, it's so cool that the fans are part of the family. Like, I mean, I've got my Maiden shirts. Like, I think that when you're close with the fans and you know, you get fueled by them, and there's such musicians that don't get it. But it's you know, it's a choice, you know. If you don't care, you don't care. But it's really sad because at some point I think the fan realize it. But the people around the band are strong fans, dedicated, and that's what you need, you know. Every records they are there and still enjoying the band, and it's great. And I think the pandemic changed everything in the way of we are about to we just begin the switch with new generation of headliner, and that's what we need, because for many years Polaroid's the same band that headline, blah blah blah. But I think that it's going to be interesting for the next years, and I'm sure live you saw people are crazy right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it has been a certain amount of change, and we can kind of feel it ourselves. Because I'm not going to say that we took anything for granted before the pandemic, but it was a lot, and we were touring very frequently. You know, from the early days, from 2010 all the way up till 2020. So, you know, 1 decade of releasing 6 albums and doing at least 16, 17, 18 tours. You know, it takes a little toll on you physically, mentally, all these things while being, you know, super fun. But I don't think at any point we were taking it for granted. But once it gets taken away from you, then you also understand the consequences of not being able to do it in the moment. And, you know, right in the middle of the pandemic, let's say, you know, halfway into 21, that's already been a year and a half, and you still don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. That's when it starts to get, you know, a little bit scary, right? So, you know, from my point of view, obviously we re-entered the stages. You know, in 2022 we played home country show at Sweden Rock Festival, which is one of the bigger festivals, and yeah, fucking great festival. One of the bigger festivals in Europe, also home country, with all those fans that you haven't seen for, you know, 2.5 years. So obviously that's going to be a very reinvigorating feeling. It's going to bring a lot of enthusiasm, and it's going to make you, if nothing else, it's going to make you extra thankful for doing what you do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm guilty too. You know, at some point I was seeing a lot of show and doing review and everything, and not got bored, but tired, and it was more hard to, you know, oh, I have to go tonight, and then since the pandemic, every time I'm like, oh, 2 years of Netflix, I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. Screw Netflix forever. No, I mean, that's definitely the case for me as well, because I think, especially the last 5 years right before the pandemic, 15 to 20, let's say, I mean, I wasn't necessarily going to that many shows here, you know, in Sweden, in Gothenburg, where I live. And if I, you know, played at a festival, I wasn't necessarily out watching a lot of bands because you're busy yourself, you know. What I really got reminded of is that I also missed watching concerts. So as soon as the shows, you know, began again after the pandemic, that was the very first thing that I did. You know, wasn't playing shows myself actually, because that was a little bit further down the line. The very first thing that I did was to buy a ticket to some cool local band or some, you know, great European metal act passing by, or if I got invited by some friends that we had a tour with earlier, and you know, go have a beer, watch a show, you know, like any other fan. And this was a great. This was reinvigorating and a little bit of reawakening as well. So it's like with anything that is very dark and bleak, that I'm not going to say that it balances things out, because it doesn't, because, you know, the whole pandemic was so terrible in so many ways for so many people. But at the end of the day, there's nothing evil that doesn't bring something good with it. And that's also part of the Amaranth concept also, you know, even you're dealing with, you know, dark topics and whatever, there's always a little silver lining there somewhere if you're willing to look for it.
It's so true. It's so true. And making music during the pandemic, it really changed something negative into something positive. And it's cool that it's the mojo of the band. You know, Sweden is such an interesting country culturally. Musically, we really connect Quebec and Sweden for many, many years. The punk scene, the hardcore scene, the metal scene, we really dig it. I think there's a connection. Of course, we're North people, we know all about cold, but I don't know the mentality and everything. There's similarities. And how was the scene when you grow up, and how it is right now for the local scene in Sweden? And is it hard for band? And was it hard back in the days?
I mean, obviously, I'm from Gothenburg, and for the people who are knowledgeable about the Gothenburg death metal scene, then they will recognize the name Gothenburg. It's almost emblematic, for that style of music from starting in the mid '90s, and let's say that the golden age was mid '90s to about 10 years later. But when I was 13, 14, 15, and started to go to concerts in Gothenburg, there was top class acts playing very small, intimate venues. And this is going to leave a mark. Like, for example, you had In Flames or Dark Tranquillity, At the Gates, Dissection, so on. A little bit later, also Evergrey, Hammerfall, those kinds of bands, they were playing, 250 capacity venues at the time. So it wasn't, the 2000 or 6000, or like In Flames plays, if they play in Gothenburg today, that would be 12,000. So they come a long way, And there was also a lot of bands, that didn't stick around, that were, almost equally, and in some cases even better than the bands that did stick around. So if you're into Gothenburg death metal, do some research about it. There's great bands like Sacrilege and The Crown and so on. So I mean, this was hugely, needless to say, hugely influential to me. So the very first band that I started was a Gothenburg melodic death metal band, back in '96 or '97 when I was a kid. And then I kind of grew out of it, and people probably got a little bit tired of the genre because it got very overplayed. Everything from, and it also spread to, the other Scandinavian countries with bands like Bodom, Amorphis, and, so on. And this got very exposed to the US, and the US reacted by spitting out 10 million acts that then later in the 2000s, became the metalcore genre. And nothing bad about the metalcore genre, but it was just the vibe was different than what I had grown up with 10 years earlier. And when it's 10 years later, you're also going to be 10 years more cynical about music. So I mean, to connect this to Amaranth, that's roughly speaking, like in 2007, 2008, that's when we kind of were starting to think, like, how can we interpret this background that we have, infuse it with a bunch of new things that isn't necessarily the American interpretation of it. Not saying that our interpretation was better or more valuable or whatever, but it was our take on it, basically. And when it comes to Swedish bands, melodies, Swedish music in general, melodies has always been front and center, ever since ABBA, basically. So that's something we were very excited about.
Yeah, you're right, and they got thrash metal. They got a lot of style that it's their own, and it's great like that. I think you're right. Every culture has their thing, and Sweden is really defined into that genre. But it's amazing the diversity and the quality of the band in such small for us Canadian, because Canada is such big, and we're having a good metal scene now for the last 10 years, but it wasn't as strong as, like you said, like Sweden back in the days. So it's great to see that it's still wealthy and alive, and that people still enjoy it like their first time, and still have the energy to push it.
Yeah, I guess the whole thing has just become a lot more mainstream, and you have different kinds of bands, or even you have the same bands but doing something different. So obviously the energy and the hype and the scene looks different, it acts differently. But I mean, I cannot say that I'm disappointed about the fact that you have at least 3 to 4 bands that are based in Sweden, that can play the Gothenburg Arena here in front of 12,000 people, because that was back in the day unthinkable completely. Like, just to compare the sizes of things, like one of the first metal shows that I saw was Metallica in 1992. And then I would say about 15 years later, that was the first time that Hammerfall played Scandinavium. Shortly thereafter, you had In Flames playing Scandinavium, and shortly thereafter, we were playing Scandinavium as support to Sabaton, for example. So that's I'm pretty proud to see what the scene has become, even though it isn't underground in the same way. It isn't your belonging in the same way. It has grown into something much bigger and much vaster and much more mainstream in one way. But I think the Swedish metal scene, it's always had its emblem of quality, and I think it's kept that for sure.
It's so true. It's so true. It's really geek. It's really geek. When you listen to people trying to
Yeah,
define a
for
band,
sure.
it's so funny.
Yeah.
Like you are the greatest example. Like if you go like pop, metal, power, some death metal and that, and you just like press play, man. It doesn't like I don't get it if you don't press play. It's because it's original, and when people had a hard time to define it, that's when I think it's really good. And you hit the point. You're gonna make something different and not trying to recreate what you enjoy. It worked for some, but it's a fail for some too. So I think that when your quest is about doing something different, but still having the roots of metal, I think it's just perfect. Ghost is a good example for that. People are complaining that they're not metal, but in a way, it doesn't really matter. It's not about what is metal. It's not music. It's your mentality, I think, more than the music.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Ghost is a perfect example of that. That I might agree that it's not particularly super heavy, but obviously it sits much closer to metal than it sits to any other genre. Like if we would compare it to dance music, hip hop, like even rock music, because even though the distortion is turned down a little bit, like Tobias Forge obviously grew up playing in, I don't know, 10 metal acts, whereof 8 out of 10 were really brutal. So what you essentially have is a metal musician that is just turning down the distortion. But obviously his entire background is metal music, and that's why metal people, they vibe to it, but they can also react, negatively to it because it's not heavy enough. And whatever floats your boat at the end of the day. We've had a lot of the same opinions that, when we released our first single back in 2011, then they were literally hailing our first single as the absolute end of metal. Like, I loved metal, but with the release of this song, it has now come to an end. It's been a good run, but now it's over. Amaranthe single-handedly destroyed the entire genre. And I'm reading popcorn, and eating popcorn and reading the comments and having a great time about it. But it's funny because I was actually googling it or looking it up on Wikipedia when it comes to people trying to define our genre, and what it says on Wikipedia is where exactly Amaranthe's music fits into the heavy metal sphere remains notoriously undefined. I love that, notoriously undefined. That means that we did something good, We
Yeah.
didn't put ourselves into a box,
After
and then we
years
didn't paint
of
ourselves into a
trying, like,
corner. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. But it means that you success and people were talking about you, and that's the only thing at the end. But it's funny how people, that don't play music wanna, poke you for something. And it's the sad thing about the hate, with the internet and everything. But at the end, you don't take yourself seriously, so it don't affect you. And that's a good thing because we need you. We need music like that because it's not just great, it's different, it's original. And when I hear, when I discovered the band a couple of years ago, I was like, wow, man, everything I love about music is there. So, who cares what people think? At the end, it's what you love to do and it's your song. So it's not an ego thing. You do it for yourself. And I'm curious, like with the experience and time, is it more hard to create music and write music, or it's still a huge challenge?
I mean, I say what I would typically say in this case, actually, because it's just very true that we spend so much time on the road. We're like, we release an album, then we have about a couple of years, to do the album touring cycle, and we don't get to write any music in the meantime because of, frankly, we don't have the time for it. So once it comes around to album writing time again, like you have collected a million ideas, millions of impressions, like you had so many experiences in so many different countries with, a billion different people. So like the only thing my brain wants is just to, brutally spit out music. Anyways, Eric, I have to underline that I actually, unfortunately, have a new interview coming up like more or less 1 minute ago. So I feel like we could have this conversation for another 2 hours at least. So we
We
need
will
to
have to
reconnect
do a
at some
part
point.
two.
Talk.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
part two.
much. Thank you so much.
My pleasure
And
entirely.
and make sure that I'm sorry for the next journalist, but you're amazing. And people go grab the new records. We're gonna wait for you in Quebec City. Thank you for your time, and make sure I write to Christine to do a part two in the upcoming years. And thank you for your time, man. I had a blast.
Yeah, let's do a follow-up once the touring is started and everything, and let's catch up again. Super good to
Hell
talk to you,
yeah.
Eric, and pleasure, and thank you for taking the time, and talk soon.
Cheers.
Prescription is what you need. No more inhibition. Set yourself free. Just let go. That's my only plea. A punk rock prescription is what you need.